Withnail I remains one of the most beloved films of the 1980s. A coming-of-age tragic comedy about two young actors finding their way through the squalor of their flat and the faded glory of London in 1969. A time capsule for those growing up in the late 60s, but the film was also embraced by those growing up in the late 80s when the film was released. Despite being something of a period piece, it still feels relevant today as it continues to find a new audience. The second act of the film is almost entirely shot in and around the Lake District in Cumbria, England's most northwesterly county. At over 900 square miles, the Lake District is England's largest national park. The film was shot primarily within the far eastern areas of the park, and we will be exploring each of these famous locations, whilst also discussing the finer points of the film as well as some of the issues facing one of the most picturesque and celebrated parts of the UK. Our journey starts in the village of Bampton. We make our way out of the village in an easterly direction, heading up Scarside, before heading back westwards across the River Lather and then back down into Bampton. So Withnail I, the cult 1987 classic, written and directed by Bruce Robinson, something of a autobiographical account of parts of his young life as a sort of budding young actor. And he, of course, is represented by the I character, who you would only know from the script is called Marwood, because we never actually hear his name in the film. And the Withnail character is based upon his friend Vivian McCarroll. Bruce Robinson originally wrote the story as a novel, and then adapted it into a screenplay. It was unpublished, the novel. I believe it has since been published, but certainly not prior to the release of the film. And we are approaching now the first location. Perhaps the Withnail fans out there will already know where I am. But this is the scene with the bull. Shut that gate. There we are. The Withnail I gate. I'll tell you what, Richard E. Grant did well to jump over that wall. Shut that bloody gate. Let's hope there is no bull here today. No marker to suggest anything was shot here. You come walking down this hill, leave this gate open, and the farmer from over there, because the bull comes through, shopping goes everywhere. Apparently this bull that they used here, they used this particular bull because it was in the habit, doing that with his foot. And they couldn't get him to do it when they wanted him to, of course. But then after they'd shot the scene, he became quite aggressive and chased off the crew down the hill, apparently. So the first act of the film takes place in London, in what we assume is one of the flat, anyway, the flat that they rent, Withnail and I rent. And it opens with the wonderful music of King Curtis's interpretation of the Procol Harum song, White Shade of Pale. apparently Bruce Robinson didn't want to use the original as he felt it would be cliched, so chose to use this King Curtis version, which is very poignant, as is much of the music used in the film, the original music. So they used this King Curtis version. Sad story with that King Curtis, that's a live version recorded, as you'll know from listening to it. And sadly King Curtis was murdered the night that he recorded that piece of music. Makes a nice sound. A little bit creaky, but doesn't drag. No drag, which is always nice. There we go. A coward you are, Withnail, an expert on bulls. You are certainly not. Magnificent view as we walk across this hillside here. We can see a great deal of the High Street range. So I guess this one there is Load Pot Hill, and then Weather Hill and High Rise, Curtsey Pike. This branch tree in the foreground. I think we can actually just about make out, is that Haweswater there? Yeah, fantastic. So we're just in the far eastern reaches of the Lake District here. And these are the far eastern fells as Wainwright described them. Anyway, back to Withnail. So it was definitely, I feel certainly that, you know, I had a friend at university that was, a couple of friends probably, who, you know, were kind of influenced by, you know, they probably come from a bit of a privileged background, and so they tend to do things their own way, and, you know, because they have that sense of privilege, they don't have the worries that maybe the rest of us has, which allows them to lead a more bohemian lifestyle, which sometimes we're easily impressed by. And that was certainly the case with Bruce Robinson and his experience, you know, going to a fairly ordinary school, coming from a reasonably ordinary background, and then brushing shoulders with some wealthy people who are also very articulate people. And, you know, Vivian McCarroll apparently introduced him to a great deal of literature, and was a really, you know, a good friend, and of course Bruce Robinson goes on to be, you know, a renowned writer, a wonderful writer. That script for Withnail I is probably a peak, although he previously, in 1984, of course, had been nominated for an Oscar and won a BAFTA for his script for The Killing Fields, which was produced by David Putnam. And David Putnam apparently had read a version of Withnail I, the screenplay, prior to it obviously being put into production, and thought, wow, this guy, you know, really knows what he's doing, and took a gamble on him. And sure enough, Killing Fields is a brilliant film, directed by Roland Joffrey, and who also directed The Mission, who later fell out big time with Bruce Robinson over a film they made together, in which Joffrey just basically rewrote the script. And anyway, I don't think they're on talking terms. The best view of the Lake District is from outside the Lake District. No tourists here. So, having negotiated some sheep, we're winding our way down into the valley now, in which the River Lowther runs through it, and we'll be crossing the River Lowther and then heading up the other side of the valley a little bit before finally winding our way back down into the other end of Bampton. So how did the film get made? Well, on a budget is the answer. I think it was made for £1 million, which is, you know, meagre amount when it comes to filmmaking. So a friend of Bruce Robinson, I think, put the half of the money up. Paul Heller, he was the producer of the film. And then they approached Handmade Films, which was the George Harrison and Dennis O'Brien ran British film company of the time that had made lots of different films of that era, some more successful than others. A Private Function was one in which actually they were introduced to, or Bruce Robinson first saw Richard Griffiths, who obviously, you know, went on to become Uncle Monty. Apparently he knew instantly that that was his Uncle Monty. So that's how he came to be cast. But as for Withnail and I, let's start with Paul McCann. So Paul McCann had previously been seen in something. So I think he was in something on TV called The Monocled Mutineer. So he was sort of known. Whereas Withnail, Richard E. Grant, was completely unknown. Well, as was Bruce Robinson, really. Well, he wasn't unknown, was he? Because he'd done The Killing Field, so that's not entirely true. But he was unknown as a director, let's say. So it was his first time directing anything. So it was all new experience to him. Richard E. Grant was a complete unknown, hadn't done anything, and there were others considered for the role before he got it. So they had considered Bill Nighy. So Bill Nighy was good friends, I think, with Bruce Robinson. Bill Nighy liked to drink, as did Bruce Robinson. He was worried that he liked to drink too much and things would get a bit out of control. So Bill Nighy didn't get the part. Kenneth Branagh was considered for the I character, but he wanted to play Withnail, so that didn't happen either. So Richard E. Grant. Richard E. Grant, of course, famously, but he doesn't drink. I'm not sure whether it is that he has an allergic reaction. I don't think that's the case, because if that is the case, what happens later, well, it wasn't very good, whereby Robinson asked him to, he said, look, if you're going to take this part, you've got to at least know what it feels like to be drunk. I need you to have that sort of mental kind of memory to refer back to. Anyway, but in casting him, because the famous story goes in the scene in the kitchen where they've got this something growing in the sink, and Withnail's character famously shouts out, "Fork it!" And the way he said "fork it" in his audition was spot on, and Bruce Robinson knew that he was the guy. But his father, I think, was an alcoholic, and I know he's written expressively about his childhood growing up in South Africa and the things. So perhaps understandable that he doesn't drink. But yeah, on screen he is amazing. I mean, absolutely amazing. I mean, some of the scenes. For instance, the scene in the car in the Jaguar when they're driving. Bit of blanket bog here. When they're driving up to the Lake District, his acting in that scene is just fantastic, really. But throughout the whole film, he's brilliant, isn't he? Because that scene as they're driving up the motorway, which presumably is meant to be the M6, was actually the M25, and the M25 had not officially opened when they were filming it. I think the M25 officially opened, I don't know, just after 87 was it opened, and the road was sort of about finished, and they got permission to film, and then they filled the car, allowed them to fill the motorway with, you know, vintage cars and whatnot. Here we are, the River Lauder, with a sort of Indiana Jones style bridge to cross. How about that? Right, fully refreshed, we move on across this Indiana Jones bridge. Off the tourist trail, you find little gems like this. Bouncing. If the camera's bouncing, it's because I'm bouncing. Gumbo doesn't like it. There we go. Back on solid ground. Yes, so of course then they're driving up to the Lake District in that old Jag. Which again is autobiographical, apparently. He did have an old Jag, his friend, in his youth, Carol. And of course they're listening to Hendrix on the radio, all along the watchtower. It was probably one of the more expensive elements of the film to get that particular track, although at the time in the late 80s I'm not sure that Hendrix was as popular as he probably is now. You know, you could say that the death of Jimi Hendrix at the age of 27, you know, kind of in a way represents the death of the 1960s, the failure of the hippie movement to paint it black. They're selling hippie wigs in Woolworths, man, as Danny so eloquently points out. So yeah, the end of an era. Perhaps that's one of the reasons that they chose to use Hendrix in the way that they did. Of course, it works as a road movie track, but perhaps there's deeper meaning to that use than just that. And then, of course, there's the Voodoo Child. I think it's a Voodoo Child reprise that they use. There's a sort of Jimi Hendrix reprise on the way down, back from the Lake District. So that scene there wasn't going to be in the film. couldn't get the money for it, so apparently Bruce Robinson shot that out of his own pocket. Get in the back of the van! Wouldn't have had that if he hadn't shot that scene. Sorry, Gumbo, I think he was a bit startled by that. Get in the back of the van! One of the many often quoted lines from the film. We could go on and on. One of the plastic bags, stuff down the side of this gate. Shut that bloody gate! Just had to stop to let a farmer by. Farmer? Is he the farmer? Of course he's the fucking farmer! I've gone on holiday by mistake. The landlord had a complexion like the inside of a teapot. Sounds like something from Dickens, doesn't it? Grotesque. Dickens' character, many of whom are equally grotesque in this film, but yes, the landlord from the Crow and the Crown, the pub featured, the main featured pub in the Lake District. There is another one, isn't there? Called is it the King Henry? And they go into what is meant to be Penrith, but it's actually, I think, Stony Stratford in. Stony Stratford or Stratford, I think, in Buckinghamshire. So all those scenes were the pub, the coffee shop, both pubs in the Lake District are not in the Lake District. Where hopefully we'll find one in the Lake District, and whether or not the landlord has a complexion like the inside of a teapot remains to be seen, but I'll be looking closely. Did you hear the one about the agent who ran into one of his actors at a cocktail party and said, "So what do you do then?" Such is the life of a jobbing actor, that often their agents don't even know who they are. And that is actually something that had happened to Bruce Robinson in real life. And the film is very much, obviously, about that, the lack of work available for actors, how difficult it is as a profession to get on. And in many ways, they're kind of like performing. Obviously, they're performing throughout the film. It's a film, but they're sort of performing within their character. For having a lack of actual, paid parts. In some ways, like the TV show Spaced did. Gumbo, I need to get you through this. Can we open this gate? Go on then. Good girl. So the film is obviously has that as one of its central themes, but alongside that, it also is very much about the class system, and Withnail, obviously from the upper class. This is very remote. I have no idea if anyone has even used this footpath. Like 20 years. Goodness me. What is this place? Magic garden. Wow. You're doing better than me, Gumbo. Here, through here, Gumbo, here, fine, here. And of course they reference that so clearly when Uncle Monty says, where did you school? Ah, he went to the other place, Monty. And as they're leaving the room, Withnail says, it's free to those that can afford it, very expensive to those that can't. Such a great line. Public school, etc. Very expensive to those that can't. And peanuts to those that can. Bampton is, looked it up on Wikipedia, and it's famous for having Britain's first woman county councillor back in 1907, Mary Noble. There we go then, the front box. Oh look, ah look, flowers, and it works. But yeah, you could come and ring somebody from here, which is kind of cool. 01931 713 229. Morning. Day 2 of our walk. It's an early start because it's a warm day. And I'm a bit worried about the weather really, because it's a bit too warm to be walking the dog, but I'm here, so we'll just have to try to keep to the shady spots where we can and find plenty of water for her. And we really are living climate change on a day like today. Ready, Gumbo? Shall we go? Come on then. Mind the sheep. So after we signed out yesterday, we went for a nice drink in the Mardale Inn, which is a community-run pub, and we were talking about how Bampton was the place of the first woman county councillor. Well, who should we run into in the pub but Tim Farron, the Kendal local MP of Westmoreland. So yeah, very, very friendly he was. That was great. So we ramble on. I feel like we're just rambling through this Withnail and I film in the way that they just rambled through their story, the characters, the situations, without any real sort of structure or hard and fast plot line. And those sorts of films pretty rare, and you know, probably some of the credit for allowing a film like that to be made is down to the independence of handmade films. George Harrison particularly is willing to, you know, take risks, and of course he even lent his guitar Gently Weeping to the soundtrack, so perhaps that was for free. It was probably in his own best interests to do so. So yeah, another great piece of music used in the film. These lovely little walking lanes that they have here. Grass is nice and moist, so that's good for the dog. She'll be enjoying that. There's plenty of dew on the ground at the moment because it's early. I'll be keeping her cool. Now, reached a bit of an impasse. I said, off you go. Good lad. Good lad. You know it makes sense. Go on then, away you go. Go on, go join your pack. You heard. Right, so we can nip through here maybe. Or we could get into that adjacent field. I think we'll try nipping through here first. So we safely negotiated the cows. He didn't really bat an eyelid, to be honest, when I opened the gate. Just slipped straight by. That was good. Wouldn't be a Withnail, wouldn't be a film about Withnail I if we didn't have a proper cow encounter. Well, not about proper, but that'll do. We don't want any more. Some stepping stones. Saw these on the map. It looked interesting. Gorgeous. Coming that way for? Don't want to use the stepping stones. A lovely spot. What we're also walking along here is what's known as the Postie's Way, the old postman's way. So back in the day, the postmen and women used to deliver the post by foot, and so deliver the post by foot, and for miles. So they'd have to go on, they'd start off in Shap post office, and they'd head off down towards TAILBERT, which is where we're heading, and then they'd head down into Swindale up to Mosedale if they had post for Mosedale, and then back to Withnail Hall, Withnail or SLEDDALE Hall, which is where we're ultimately heading, and then full circle round to Shap. And they'd come by and they'd sometimes blow a trumpet or blow a whistle, a bugle of some kind to warn the locals that they were on their way, they were about to arrive. So they'd be frantically writing their letters out, and then I think then he'd sort of, I don't know whether he'd stop sometimes and then, you know, for a couple of hours and then come back and collect like a second post, you know. But and some people like lived in such lonely conditions, so desolate, like in TAILBERT where we're heading, that they would actually write letters to themselves just so that the postman would come by and see how they were doing. and a bit of human communication. So yeah, postal routes, and they're all over the country, up in Scotland, down in Devon, and here obviously. So yeah, that's an interesting little thing. We are currently on one of those postal routes that will take us into TAILBERT and then along to SLEDDALE.
On the post's path many moons ago, between Shap and SLEDDALE. On the post's path, come rain or shine, he'd always bring the mail. Listen out, you scribes, for the bugle call, the post is on his way. Listen out, you scribes, get your letters down if you want them sent today. Brown Street felt it loom over the boggy path around. Brown Street felt was many a mile from home, safe and sound. One old maid in TAILBERT got lonely now and then. That one old maid wrote to herself, so the postie would call again.
So this little stream that we've been crossing alongside us, running back up to Keld, is the source of the River Lowther. So if you follow this river down, it becomes a grand river as it meets with Swindale Beck, and goes on all the way. I think it meets with the Emont River at Broome Castle. Beautiful spot at Broome Castle there. So over in the distance, over there, is Shap Abbey. Probably can't quite make it out with the camera, but the Shap Abbey was actually the last monastery to be built and the last one to be dissolved. TAILBERT, little visited TAILBERT. So TAILBERT is the moment when Marwood has his, well, it's when he has his emotional awakening, really, not specifically at the farmhouse, but it's when he steps out of SLEDDALE Hall or Crow's Crag, and he steps out, and of course he sees Haweswater in front of him, the lake, and then steps off walking through the countryside and finally finds his way down to this little farmhouse in TAILBERT, where he has an encounter with one of the locals. But we'll hopefully find this place, although it might be tricky, but we'll try. And to me, that sense of wonder that he has when he steps out of the house is at the heart of the film. It references his line earlier in the film when he's writing in his diary, "We are indeed drifting into the arena of the unwell, making an enemy of our future. What we need is harmony, fresh air, stuff like that." An enemy of our future. What we need is harmony, fresh air, stuff like that. Well, that is what we need. That's what people need for their sanity. If only they'd realise it. But more than that, the world needs it. The earth needs it. Biodiversity, climate change, flooding all the time, all these different issues, and where we're heading now, Swindale, has put itself very much at the heart of all of that, and so it ties in really nicely with that quote from Withnail I, which to me is at the heart of the film. So he's not impressed with the local woman that he speaks to, and says, well, the locals are not as I imagine them to be. Thought they'd be like something from an H.E. Bates novel, as I've been led to believe. Drinking cider and talking about butter. That's the cottage. Sitting here now in front of this gill. It's the breeze just blowing through. Gumbo sitting there content. Not sure it's always like this up here, but right now it really is. Tranquility in itself. Shall we live here? Yes, if isolation is your thing, then this is your walk, but we're finally reaching a crossroads. An aquatic crossroads of sorts, which is interesting. Even though we've had all this dry weather, can you imagine what it must be like in winter? Hey, dragonflies. Now then, Peat Hill, Mosedale, Truscap, Withnail. Interesting iconography they've got there. A person walking, really not a footpath. A bike, good luck with that. Maybe that one's a bit better than one we've been on. Amazing view of the reservoir, SLEDDALE Reservoir. See, it's suddenly all worth it, all that clambering through that mire back there. And here we are. There it is. There it is. Isn't that cool? What a way to approach it. Production designer Michael Podwood, he was the one that found this place, came up here, decorated it all inside. It was obviously, I think, pretty run down. I think it was owned by United Utilities Water Company, which owned this whole area pretty much, and still do. And so it was run by them, and he, with this arrangement anyway with them, and he decorated it all inside, and you know, made it look the way it looked. And of course it's really grim and dreary, isn't it, when they first arrive there, and then it's all illuminated and made cozy when kind Uncle Monty arrives, and the whole place is magically transformed by the lighting and the production design. So it's had its ups and downs over the years, Withnail, I understand. In the last few years bought by somebody, and they're lovingly kind of restoring the building. And in fact, they hold screenings in the courtyard that you'll remember from the film, of the movie. And I noticed that they've got, in the next couple of weeks, a couple coming up by coincidence. I didn't know about it, otherwise obviously that would have been a nice thing to tie in, but I'm not available for that. So it would have been great weather for it right now, wouldn't it? Go. So this is the shooting for fish location. The crew must have all wandered down that hill, and there you go. How did they get down there? Well, we've got to get down there somehow. Haven't we, Gumby? What a great location. Great location. That's what we're talking about. Authenticity. I don't know what the risk assessment people would make of this nowadays. A little lighters. Probably the best location yet. What do you think, Gumbo? Hard to beat. All the algae up here, the water levels must come really, really high at times. So David Dundas apparently composed a score for this with bongos, a theme or a piece of music with bongos, and anyway, he didn't like it. So Bruce Robinson said, no, we're not having that, didn't have that one. But I've got to say that the music that he did compose was perfect for the film. So elegiac, kind of sits there at the heart and soul of the movie, and represents the sadness of both Withnail's character and Uncle Monty, and the sort of youthful optimism of Marwood's character, or I, who is the character that most people best associate with, or can most closely associate with. Yeah, great music. Uncle Motty's cottage. So as we sit here in the shadow of Uncle Motty's cottage, Crow Crag, as it was in the movie, it's a good time to think about well, we've mentioned the autobiographical nature of the film, of the script, Bruce Robinson, and the film has been accused of being homophobic, but if you know that the story of Bruce Robinson, and you kind of understand it a little bit better. So Bruce Robinson was cast as a young actor in 1968, the year the movie was set, as Benvolio in Romeo and Juliet, Franco Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet, and not a great part, but nevertheless he took it, and Zeffirelli came onto him, or let me dry your hair, or something like that, and came onto him strong. Harvey Weinstein kind of strong, and he made his life misery, you know, after that point, and made Bruce Robinson doubt himself, you know, like why did I get cast? Why did I get this role? And that's obviously a problem with anything like that happens with actors and directors, producers, whatever. So, you know, that left a lasting impression on him. But the character of Uncle Monty, and of course that's directly referenced in the newspaper at the opening scene of the film. But the character of Uncle Monty, you know, I think he shows great pathos towards Uncle Monty in his script. Obviously it is a very difficult scene, the scene in the bedroom in the house, akin to rape, really. But you know, I think that there are lines in the movie which, as I say, show great pathos towards the character of Uncle Monty. Society's crime, not ours. I do sincerely hope you find the happiness which, alas, has always been denied to me. Poor old bastard, as Marwood says. So there's great pathos, and, you know, I think it feels like very relevant now. It doesn't feel homophobic at all. It's trying to not be homophobic. It's trying to readdress the balance, as it is as the film does in many other ways. So, yeah, that's my feeling on it. Obviously, others will disagree with me, but I disagree that the film is homophobic. The great Uncle Monty. We're at the end of an age. We live in a land of weather forecasts that set in, shat on by Tories and shoved up by Labour. It's like a little oasis round here. I haven't seen one person. If you had a body of water this size in the Midlands, you'd have all sorts of issues with swimmers and picnicking and rubbish being left behind. I know they've got all that issue the other side of those fells in the Lake District itself, but here on the far eastern side it doesn't seem to have any bother. Everybody's over there, I guess. A lovely day like this, not a soul. Anyway, this has been a good walk. A bit disappointed that I didn't get over to Swindale on the walk today. Could have continued up over the top there, would have brought me down into Swindale, but it just seemed a bit too far for this walk, especially in these conditions. So that's a bit of a disappointment because I do love Swindale. I've been there before, but I'm very interested to see all the changes that have been going on up at Swindale. So Swindale is owned by that particular section of the Swindale Beck and all around there. It's about 4,000 hectares that's owned by the RSPB, and they've basically rewinded the river, and that's introduced trout, salmon back into the river, and then it's had a knock-on effect up the valley as well on the much larger 50,000 hectares, I think, that the Lowther Castle area has, or the Lowther estate. So there's a lot of rewilding at the centre of all this, of course, biodiversity, increasing that. The sheep are pretty much gone except for very small herds, one or two I think. Reintroducing cattle, which obviously changes the nature of the landscape, native cattle. Because one of the things that I didn't realise until recently is that when you see bracken, that is effectively where woodland should be. And I know that the Lake District National Park have ambition to increase the amount of woodland. I think I'm not sure if it's about 13% at the moment. They want to increase it to 18, but a similar amount, something like 14% of the national park is covered in bracken. And what bracken grows effectively where there used to be trees. So it's like a glade species. You get like little glades in woods and stuff like that, and you get bracken. Well, this is what that is there. And so where you see bracken, as a sort of a mind exercise when you're walking in the Lake District and you see the bracken on the fells, there should be trees there natively, and so it's often towards the top of the fells, leaving like the shaven crown at the top, isn't it? And that shaven crown is called I think a montane scrub, I think they call it, that kind of. And there's literally none of that left in England at all. So you can imagine if all that bracken that was kind of towards the top of a fell became woodland, that montane scrub landscape might return, and all the associated wildlife that would benefit from it. Come on. So we mentioned salmon, and also in the Lowther estate further upstream, they've now released beavers, and I know that's something that they want to do down towards Swindale as well. So there's lots of good things happening. So it seems funny yesterday that we met Tim Farron, the local MP, in a pub, because he's got all these issues to deal with. Of course, probably the largest one of all is sheep. 70 odd years and before, they've farmed sheep here, but particularly since the Second World War, where it was really encouraged by the government at the time. But there are some statistics. Apparently 83% of the sheep reared in this country, the meat gets sent abroad, and only 1% huge heron down there. You see that? Only 1% of our national sort of food intake or energy intake is from lamb. So we're not eating it, So you might think, oh yes, you've got the fleeces. Well, that's even worse. You know, fleeces now are, you know, in the old days, fleece would be the primary product from sheep, and meat would be a byproduct. You know, now fleece, I'm told it costs a farmer more to shear a sheep than they'll actually get for the fleece itself. So, you know, it's got to be in everybody's best interest to try and change with the times. And I know there are lots of farms that are doing that. And I know that the local authorities are very much trying to bring them, you know, gently along rather than force people, because you can't force people to do these things. You have to kind of bring them with you. Hopefully, you know, they're doing that, and therefore the Lake District has a positive future ahead of it. One way or another, we'll see you tomorrow for day 3 of our final day of our Withnail I expedition. Day 3 of our journey, we're at Haweswater, which is of the lakes in the Lake District. This one is a man-made one. We're at the head of the valley of Mardale. Called that because underneath the water is the village of Marsdale and Measdale that were flooded in 1929 to make way for this reservoir, which keeps the folk of Manchester in water, along with the smaller wet SLEDDALE where we were yesterday. Should the people of Manchester be worried? Yes, they probably should. As we all should. I'll be raining again before you know it. All the bodies from the church here, the graveyard, had to be moved to Shap. So the water must be covering all this, mostly. Well, we found a way back up off the shoreline onto the path, and yeah, we can see the island there out in the middle of Haweswater, because interestingly enough, there is actually only one officially titled lake in the Lake District. Does anyone know which one that is? You might say Lake Windermere because you think, oh, that's the way people say it, but no, that one's actually just called Windermere. So the answer is Bampton Lake is the only lake in the Lake District by title. The longest lake is Lake Windermere, and I just did it, you see, I just did it, Windermere, and the deepest is Haweswater. We had to take a break from the bracken. We got stuck in it. The path just is non-existent this side of the water. So if you're ever out of Haweswater, don't ever try that. Not this time of year with all the bracken, which should normally be trees, of course, as we pointed out the other day. Yeah, completely overgrown. So we just come out here and taking a bit of shade against this bush. Looking across Haweswater there, is a way up to High Rise, which I took with my family many years ago, and it's a bit of a mistake. We made it, but apparently we realised later it's like the connoisseur's approach to High Street. Rough Crag, is it called? Anyway, it's a proper climb. It's not a fell walk. It's hands and knees stuff some of the way. So we're going to carry on along the bay here, and then hopefully we'll find a way up. As we near the end of our walk, though, it's time just to reflect on the movie and how the film ends. So after the incident with Uncle Monty, there's a telegram arrives, and it's for Marwood, and he's got a job in Journey's End, which again is autobiographical, exactly what happened to Bruce Robinson. And of course Withnail sees the writing on the wall straight away, and things are going to change, and says, well, I can't leave already, I've still got to finish my lunch, or something of the like. And back in the flat we see another intrusion from Danny, and an inopportune moment, a little bit awkward with this Camberwell carrot at the wrong worst possible time for Marwood, and probably for Withnail. And then Marwood shortly appears with his hair short, and Withnail, let's just drink this bottle of Margot I got from Uncle Monty's cellar. No, I've got to go. Oh, I'll walk with you. And of course it feels like the end of an era. It's a scary time, and all students, young people probably can associate with that when it's time to finish. Universities come to an end, or a period in their life has come to an end, and it's now time to go and get a real job. And that's what that is all about. And of course they walk through Regent's Park, past the zoo, and they end up back in the wolves' den, just as they were at the start. And then Withnail gives the performance of his life from Hamlet, a wonderful scene, and one of the greatest passages ever written in the English language, without a doubt. And cue titles, the end. So we don't really know what happens to Withnail afterwards. We can only imagine. Anyway, let's hope he becomes a star, or became a star, and we will head on up the hill to try and find that moment. I'm gonna be a star!